Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, talking about another premium ship for World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be talking about the Ashitaka, which is a Tier 6 Japanese premium battleship. So first thing we're going to do is talk about the ship's history, but if you'd like to skip ahead, I've left a time index down in the description for your convenience. Following the Russo-Japanese War, the Japanese Navy wisely evaluated their performance versus the Tsar's forces, finding that their successes were significantly influenced by Russian political and logistical difficulties, not to mention the general incompetence of several of the Russian naval commanders. Not only that, but the United States at the time, a frenemy if there ever was such a thing, was also aggressively expanding its fleet. What came out of this was the 8-8 program, which went through a couple of phases, but is so called 8-8 because the Japanese essentially wanted a fleet that consisted of 8 new modern battleships and 8 new modern battle cruisers. With this, they felt that they could defeat the Russian Navy in the Pacific and reasonably engage the United States Navy. The Amagi-class battlecruisers, none of which were actually built as battlecruisers, were intended to take up part of the battlecruiser portion of this fleet design. The Ashitaka, also called the Takeo, would be the 4th Amagi-class battlecruiser. She was laid down in December 1921, but only 3 short months later, the Japanese signed onto the Washington Naval Treaty. The 4 Amagis were way over the tonnage limit imposed on newly constructed battlecruisers under the treaty. The treaty did allow, though, for Japanese and Americans to convert some of the ships still under construction into aircraft carriers. For Japan, that meant that 2 of the 4 battlecruisers, the Amagi and the Akagi, would be repurposed as aircraft carriers, though due to damage caused by an earthquake, the Amagi would never be completed. The Akagi was completed as an aircraft carrier and was one of 4 fleet carriers lost in America's decisive victory at Midway. The Ashitaka and Atago were both sold for scrap in 1924. As far as my general thoughts on this ship, the Ashitaka is a very powerful battleship when it comes to direct firepower. It's basically every bit as good as the Nagato, and then it has an extra turret with an extra 2 guns. It pays for this by basically being weaker than the Nagato in every other way, other than speed. And that also includes versatility, because other than your repair party, this ship has no consumables. That can mean that you feel a little bit bored, or that you aren't really contributing, or maybe that you're kind of helpless at times. But if you're here for the firepower, then the Ashitaka has plenty of that. I actually rather imagine that this ship will appeal to players who can really appreciate ships like the Vanguard, because other than the super heal, these 2 ships actually have a lot in common. Nevertheless, we're going to be comparing the Ashitaka to its Tier 6 tech tree counterpart, the Nagato. And since they're both Japanese, that means we can use the same commander. I will be using Takeo Takagi for comparison purposes, and here you can see basically all of the things that I've chosen. So first we jump into survivability. The Ashitaka is very delicate compared to the Nagato, and the Nagato isn't actually a particularly well armored battleship. You also start out with around 5,500 less hit points, which is a considerable amount and puts you towards the low end of the HP available to Tier 6 battleships. So in other words, you are not particularly well armored, and if you do make a mistake, you do not have a lot of hit points to play with here. As we look at artillery, this is actually a little bit misleading. The Nagato is actually rated as the better ship artillery-wise. That's because it has a significantly better collection of secondary guns. Now, neither one of these ships you want to take particularly into secondary range, so I would say probably don't pay attention to that rating. Both of these ships have functionally very similar guns. They're both shooting 410mm cannons. The Nagato shoots just a little bit further, with my configuration a little under a half a kilometer. The Ashitaka reloads slightly faster, just by about 1 second. And then the Ashitaka's turrets also turn slightly faster, The Nagato shells do marginally more damage, but in either case they hit pretty hard, particularly for tier 6 guns. And really, if you want to play the Ashitaka, this is why you're going to play the Ashitaka, because it has 10 410mm cannons as opposed to the 8 that you get on the Nagato. Should AA defense ever become important to the game, the Ashitaka falls down here a little bit too. It has a significantly weaker suite of anti-aircraft guns. That is both in terms of their overall range as well as their damage per second. For maneuverability, the Ashitaka is significantly faster than the Nagato, clocking in at 28.7 here. That's actually pretty good for a battleship, period. Definitely good for a tier 6 battleship, but you will be going up against some tier 7, so there are faster battleships out there. The turning circle here you can see is very big. Yeah, it's very big. I don't know what to tell you. 870 meters is pretty much Iowa levels of maneuverability, but your rudder shift is 12.6 seconds, which is not all that bad, meaning you can start some turns pretty quickly, you just won't complete them anytime soon. And for concealment, because that matters on a battleship, basically the concealment for the Ashitaka is exactly the same as the concealment for the Nagato. There's actually one number here that's slightly different, but 1/10 of a kilometer in smoke, probably not going to come up. So as we get into the game, we're going to be on neighbors. There's our ship, the Ashitaka. I actually rather like the camouflage on it. It reminds me a little of the Yubari's camo. But unlike the Yubari, I actually don't mind this ship all that much. I do find it a little bit boring to play sometimes. As you see, I only have the 2 consumables, my damage control party and my repair party. So oftentimes I find myself kind of wishing I could launch a plane or do anything else, but you just kind of have to wait until your guns reload. In this case, I finally decide to move my ship. I'm going to go out to the south side of this map and see if I can't pick on some of these ships that look like they're all crossing towards the center. I have to transfer my guns back around over my deck, but as you can see here, it's not like fast, but for a battleship, it's not exactly slow either. It's a pretty decent speed, and of course, now we're all aimed, ready to fire at anything that pops out. As it turns out, the Hipper is the first thing that I think looks sort of interesting. This is a shot at very long range. Keep in mind as you're watching those shells, I have a maximum dispersion build. So, if you run anything else, it's going to be less effective in terms of controlling those shots. I find, for the most part, with this, including flammable cannoneer, that the guns are controllable, but they will troll you at times, and you'll come up with big heaping loads of nothing. So that Vanguard is giving us a big juicy target, and I don't think he's going to make that mistake too many more times this game, just because it's mathematically not possible for him to do so. Obviously, the Vanguard is one of the ships that if you enjoy playing, the Ashitaka might be fun for you. Honestly, the guns on the Ashitaka are probably better than the Vanguard, which doesn't quite seem fair, but we're not going to take pity on him and stop shooting at him just because the Vanguard is, not the most impressive Tier 7 battleship in the game. But we continue towards the south. Starting to get the sneaking suspicion I'm not the only ship down here, though. Thankfully, the server left us a little bit of a gap that we're able to turn into. We managed to dodge those torpedoes And now it's time to turn around. We do put one more set of shots out there on that Vanguard. Sadly, we just barely get into range of the Gneisenau, but we have to transfer our decks back around to the other side of the ship. And hopefully, one of my teammates will help me pick up whatever terrible destroyer is down here trying to murder me. Queen Elizabeth is a juicy target at this range because it is, of course, not very well armored. Unfortunately, I feel the obligation to shoot at this Z-23 just because if I don't, I'm not sure anybody else is going to. JC is picking him up there, and I suspect that is bad news for that destroyer captain. But I really want that ship out of the game because it has the highest potential of harassing me up here. And obviously, though, I have a little bit of good left to right sort of mobility. Big turns and complicated maneuvers are not really a possibility in this ship. I misjudged the way that the Gneisenau was slowing down there. I put some shells past his bow. It looks like he's speeding up again. But I won't be able to get a shot on him just yet. Now, if the Gneisenau were to hit me at an angle like this, it would be pretty terrible news. You take a ton of citadels in this boat if you drive it around and don't give a steep angle, at least 45 degrees, to enemy battleships. Even some cruisers, with only the 330 millimeters of side armor, that's just your belt. Your upper belt armor is pretty weak, and certainly at range I found that you can get deleted pretty quickly in this ship if you're not careful. So right now is a very dangerous time for me. I am clenching hard as I see those shells coming in, but it looks like they're high explosive, and I get saved by the German dispersion. Okay, we live to fight another day. I have been hit by those Gneisenau guns sometimes, and they hurt a lot. We found the Queen Elizabeth again, still salivating at this opportunity because, of course, he is at extreme range, meaning I'm going to get some plunging fire on him, and, he's a lower tier ship. This kind of tells another story about the Ashitaka. You get a lot of, if you have well-aimed shots, you get a lot of pretty intense salvos, even without actually getting a citadel. Now, I might be doing something wrong here, but I happen to think my last couple of shots here have been pretty decent. We're following the shells in with the shell cam view. That's the X button or the A button on Xbox in preset number 1 or 2. Try to head that one off. I get that question a lot. There we see Gneisenau burning to death. We don't need to worry about him. We really do want to try to exploit this Iowa while it's giving me this big broadside. Hopefully it's not paying attention to me, but those turrets do look a little bit like they may be aware of my existence. We want to leave a very steep angle when confronting an Iowa because obviously the Iowa has really nice guns. Here you see actually an Iowa player who is driving forward, which is oftentimes very inconvenient for the enemy team. We're putting some more shells out there on him. You can see again, that's not great. Obviously, just a whole bunch of bounces. That happens too. And we walk away with 0 damage from that. I'm making an ill-advised decision here to try to shoot at the Queen Elizabeth, because in doing so I've kind of made myself a better target for the Iowa. As you can see, I'm immediately trying to fix this situation because I do not want to be blapped in the side by an Iowa. And we start to load HE just because I need to set this Iowa on fire if I'm going to actually whittle it down. There you see the shells coming in. We manage to minimize the damage. That's actually a fairly good result for what the Ashitaka has in terms of armor and hit points. So if I can keep him to that kind of damage, I think I'll be relatively okay. And as you see here, I'm basically just trying to make sure that he doesn't manage to capture our base. So we have some more incoming. We managed to bounce some more shells. So as poorly armored as the boat is, obviously keeping a steep angle can help you quite a bit here. If he were to go in straight through the back of this ship, there is still a pretty good chance that he would citadel me. We have some more incoming. Hopefully we get mostly behind this rock. And we do. Now I've got a situation where all of our guns are firing in 1 second, and then 4 seconds later we have another. So, not great. Finally, we set the Iowa on fire. People are continuing to hunt me down, though, and the damage is starting to mount up. We're going to try to repair some of that. This is unfortunate. So in any case, you see, if you put yourself in a bad position like I have, it's really hard to get out of it. But if you drive your Iowa broadside to the Ashitaka, it will eventually annihilate you. Essentially, that's the Ashitaka, trying to stay at range, trying to make sure that you continue to show, a decent angle to your opponents, waiting for that reload, shooting, rinse, repeat. It's a very powerful ship if you have the aim and the patience for it, but it definitely struggles if you have to get into close quarters sort of engagements. I would highly suggest not doing that. Anyway, I hope this video has been useful for you, and I'll see you guys on the next one.